Welcome to this presentation titled Planning for the End of the 2021 School Year. Please note that although most of the information in this presentation can be used for any school year, certain elements, such as learning priorities, are reserved specifically for the 2021 school year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Carolyn Murphy, and I'm your ESL Pedagogical Advisor at the Centre de Services Scolaires de Laval. This video is actually part of a series of actions that the school board has put forward to help the schools plan the end of the school year. Before watching this video, you may have had a presentation by your school principal on les apprentissages à prioriser, or learning priorities, and planification de l'apprentissage et de l'évaluation, planning, learning, and evaluation. These two short videos may have been followed by a team discussion on your school's vision for finalizing learning during this unique school year. In this presentation, I will come back on the important elements of planning and answer the question, why plan? We will look at the MEQ documents that you use for the planning process. We will take a look at the concept of planning in support of learning and the importance of feedback. We'll take a look at triangulation as a way of collecting evidence or traces of the progression of learning. We will look at global planning. And finally, we will look at lesson planning. I will offer you a few resources and planning for evaluation. Of course, I already know that most of you are already doing a great job with your planning, but my specific intention in this video is to offer you a better understanding of the planning process and specifically to allow you to have the tools you need to prepare for the last months of this unique school year, 2021. I know you've never done this before, but I can easily admit that it might have happened to me a long time ago. We start the school year and start thinking about planning. We get caught up in putting out fires, dealing with parents and specific children. Maybe we procrastinate for a few days. Because we're so busy, we panic and end up throwing together a couple of tools that we've found on social media to give a lesson. We simply do activities, and over a few months, we realize we may not have covered the important learning focuses or evaluated, and then the report card comes along pretty quickly. Believe me, I get it. When you work with several classes in several schools with all kinds of learning challenges, planning can become the last of your worries. So I ask you, why should we plan? Well, think about it as a recipe. You can always throw a couple of things together and make a decent meal. But when you have a recipe in hand, go shopping for exactly what you need, and follow the steps, you gain a certain confidence. You know what to do and have less chances of missing a step. A good plan will allow you to present yourself in front of your groups with much more confidence. You will know what you will be evaluating beforehand because planning learning and planning evaluation should be done at the same time. When you have a plan, it becomes easier to differentiate and to adjust your teaching on the spot. Planning helps to reduce stress. At our school board, one of the priorities is the universal design for learning, also known as Conception universelle de l'apprentissage. You may have heard words like differentiation and inclusion. The UDL concept is based on the fact that each student is different. They are born with different abilities, strengths, needs, and interests. You can see it in your classroom every day. Some need to move, some never seem to stop talking, some never seem to quite understand what you're teaching, and some just straight up refuse to work. I could go on and on, but bottom line, we need to accept and understand that diversity is the new norm. When we keep the concept of UDL in the back of our mind, we recognize that we need to revisit our plan constantly. We need to ask ourselves, What do we know about our learners and the context? What are we here to do? What are the potential barriers to learning and to the well-being of our students? What are the support mechanisms that are in place? What should we teach, evaluate, and revise? There's much more to this concept, and the objective of this video is not to review the whole concept in detail, but I do invite you to look up Universal Design for Learning on YouTube. There's a short 5-minute video by Cast that you will find very interesting. I have also added it to the ESL website on the Outils de vos CP of the BV. When it comes to planning, I know that you're already doing most of what needs to be done. You're already choosing objectives, focusing on learning priorities, planning learning and evaluation sequences. So let's take it to the next level. The MEQ has many documents that are mandatory for planning the progression of learning of our students. Let's take a moment to look at them together. Please know that these documents are also available on the Outils de vos CP section of the School Board BV. In January 2021, the MEQ produced the document Learning to Prioritize. As the MEQ states, this document is a planning aid for teachers in an exceptional context where learning conditions have been affected by the health crisis. It identifies in a comprehensive manner the learning to be prioritized. It will be important to devote time to these elements before the end of the school year in order to help students progress to the next level. If the learning context permits it, teachers are, of course, invited to go beyond the elements presented in this document by drawing on the official published documents, in particular, the Quebec Education Program and the Progression of Learning. The Quebec Education Program, known as the PFEQ, Programme de Formation de l'École Québécoise, is a common reference to all stakeholders in the school system. It is competency-based and is rooted in the cultural, economic, geographic, historical, social, and political realities of contemporary Quebec society. The PFEQ presents a number of broad areas of learning which deal with issues that are important to both individuals and societies and of particular concern to young people. Schools must see that students develop generic abilities that are solidly grounded in an organized body of knowledge, and in Quebec, these abilities are called cross-curricular competencies. There are also clear connections between ESL and other language programs, including French. For example, in all these programs, students develop communicative competencies and respect for other cultures, use processes, strategies, and resources, and explore a variety of texts. Finally, the 3 subject-specific competencies should be developed in synergy in an interactive learning environment. The PFEQ is the basis of what is taught in all disciplines, in all cycles, in Quebec. The images shown here are pulled from the PFEQ for the secondary level. Another important mandatory document published by the MEQ is the Progression of Learning. This document was updated by the MEQ in January 2021 to highlight the learning priorities for the end of the school year due to the pandemic. These documents are available on the MEQ website, and I have also posted them on our Outils de vos CP ESL website. Make sure that when you pull up the one for your cycle, that you have the version with the highlighted priorities. The last very important document published by the MEQ is the framework for the evaluation of learning. These frameworks provide the guidelines for the evaluation specific to each subject in the Quebec Education Program in order to determine students' results. For each subject, the framework defines the criteria on which the students' results must be based. These evaluation criteria are based on the ones in the Quebec education program. The framework stipulates the weighting of the competencies that makes it possible to determine the subject marks to be recorded on the report card. Where applicable, it provides direct links to the progression of learning documents that give additional information on the learning specific to each subject in the Quebec education program. Section 19 of the Education Act stipulates that teachers are entitled to select the means of evaluating the progress of students so as to determine and assess continually and periodically the needs and achievement of objectives of every student entrusted in their care. It is therefore up to teachers to choose the means of evaluation for each student learning. As mentioned earlier, the framework stipulates the weighting for each competency of each discipline. Exceptionally this year, the first report card is worth 35% of the final grade, and the second report card is worth 65% of the final grade. Because there are only 2 report cards, the progression of learning for all competencies for all disciplines must be evaluated on each report card. So before we actually move on to planning, let's take a moment to recap on what documents you need to have with you when you're planning. The learning priorities published for 2021 only, the PFEQ Quebec Education Program, the progression of learning document, also known in French as the PDA, Progression des Apprentissages, and finally, the framework for the evaluation of learning. Are you ready? Let's move on to planning in support of learning. Oops, I got so excited about planning, I almost forgot. How can you even think of planning if you don't know how much time you have? So take out your agendas, your school calendars, your schedules, or whatever tool you have and start counting. How many periods do you have left between the moment you're watching this video and the end of the school year? Remember to remove any holidays, pet days, or special activities that you may already have planned. This tedious but vital step in planning will allow you to have a better idea of what can actually be done. Now remember, don't panic. You're the professional. And in the next few slides, you will understand that you already have much more information on your students than you think. Okay, so you've got your number of hours. Let's move on. The first step to planning is taking a picture of what is in front of you right now. Who are your students? What are their interests and passions? Where are they in their learning? Are they at different levels? That's okay. Look at your learning priorities, your program, the progression of learning, and start thinking. You can go to the school board's BV under Ressources and Outils de vos CP and take a look. I've actually created an interesting tool that you might find interesting right now. It's a version of the PDA with a column for each month. So choose your objectives. What do you want your students to learn? What are your intentions? Identify your learning to prioritize. Remember that the priorities identified by the ministry are neither the minimal nor the maximal expectations. You are invited to go beyond these priorities. Vary the learning contexts. Use a variety of teaching methods, such as explicit learning, reciprocal learning, problem resolution. Vary the learning support. Use grids, feedback, auto-evaluation. Plan the moments to give feedback as soon as possible after the task has been completed to ensure that the student can make the link. The more the student is engaged in the process, the more motivated he or she will be. Remember that a student who is overwhelmed will revert to protection mechanisms, such as not participating, not speaking, or even misbehaving. Also, a student who is not challenged enough will possibly misbehave as well. They need to be kept busy. You may even choose to separate the class into subgroups and give one activity that is at their level. These types of actions are also part of planning. For every evaluation situation is an opportunity to see where your students are and to differentiate, but especially to adjust your planning and teaching. Once you have placed each of your teaching and learning objectives in your calendar, it's now time to plan collection of evidence. Okay, so you may be wondering to yourself, why is she talking about triangulation, collection of evidence, and evaluation already? I haven't even made my plan yet. Well, here's your answer. It's a simultaneous process. There should be a continuous back and forth movement between global planning, lesson planning, evaluation, feedback, and regulation. You therefore need to clearly understand what kind of traces you will be thinking about before you plan. You will also see that when you do this, you open up the door to flexibility, differentiation, and actually take a lot of pressure off yourself. Let me explain what I mean. What is triangulation? Triangulation is a process by which a teacher collects evidence about student learning. This evidence is collected from 3 different sources. These sources can be conversations, observations, and products. Research has shown that when traces of evidence come from 3 different sources, conversations, observations, and productions, over a period of time, a trend develops and the validity and reliability of our evaluation improves. Why? Well, by using a variety of traces, we find ourselves taking into consideration all styles of learners, and we therefore engage all students, even those who may have more difficulty in writing, for example, or those who are unable to participate in a written evaluation to prove that they have acquired the learning for a competency. This allows the teacher to make a professional judgment about the student's learning and competency development. What does the student actually know? What can he do? And what can he express? And to regulate the teaching. It also facilitates the implementation of pedagogical differentiation and allows the student to receive feedback on his learning. Here are a few things that are good to know about collecting evidence. The evaluation of the progression of learning can be done in many ways. Not all students need to be evaluated at the same time. Show flexibility, differentiate based on students' needs. Choose the right moment to evaluate and engage the student in your process. Ask yourself, is this trace relevant? Can I differentiate for my students when I'm using this trace? Will this trace help me in my professional judgment at the end of the term? As mentioned previously, collecting the evidence is done from 3 different sources. Conversations, including interviews, oral questioning, discussions between students, blogs, etc. And keep traces. You can use checklists, anecdotal records, online tools, etc. Do you already have some traces that you could be using? When collecting traces using observations, you can observe students in many different ways. While they're holding debates, doing individual work, teamwork, role-playing, etc. Again, know that you may keep traces by recording what they're doing, using observation grids, a sticker chart, a conventional or an online grade book. All these options are good. And finally, you can collect traces of students' learning by evaluating projects, assignments, blogs, quizzes, portfolios, etc. And to keep traces, again, there are many options, from a rubric or observation grid to a self-evaluation or peer evaluation tool, remember that it is possible to adapt these tools to respect the differentiation of students. Throughout the process of teaching and evaluating the progression of learning of your students, you also need to think about the feedback that you are providing. It should be timely, as soon as possible after the task. It should be balanced. Offering too much feedback too frequently can be overwhelming. You want the feedback to be clear and explicit with details, to be respectful and supportive. When giving feedback, we want to offer the students the opportunity to practice to be able to see the progression. And this document on corrective feedback techniques can be found on the MEQ website as well and on our BV under Ressources and Ressources de vos CP. So again, here's a quick recap. We plan to be more organized. We think about each of our students and the context. We gather all our important documents, and then we think about varying the learning situations and the traces of evidence. Which now brings us back to our main point, global planning. There are about as many planning tools available as there are teachers in our schools. As mentioned earlier, I have created some planning tools which allow you to see each of the learning priorities proposed by the ministry, but as it reflects the progression of learning, we have also included other elements as well. Next, based on the cycle you teach, choose elementary or secondary. Scroll down for all the planning tools that you need. You will find videos, ministry documents, and many other tools. Here are some examples of the tools that you will find. Global planning tools, tools for collecting traces, and access to the website where you find all kinds of additional resources, including posters, planning tools, checklists, feedback tools, and much, much more. At the end of the global planning process, ask yourself these three questions. Which learning focuses will you choose? 6 to 10 between now and the end of the school year. What activities will allow your students to progress in their learning? And what three traces will you choose for each of these learning focuses to help you in your professional judgment? Once you've completed your global planning and thought about how and when you wish to be collecting traces and offering feedback, writing up your report cards will be a piece of cake because you will have collected traces throughout the term. Now let's take a look at lesson planning. Before going into actual lesson planning, I would like to mention the importance of choosing age cycle appropriate material and content for your students. Although we may think that we're doing the student a favor by offering activities from a lower grade level because they're able to complete them, we're actually telling the student that they are, for example, at the level of an 8-year-old. We need to think about how that makes the student feel and the impact it may have on their motivation. You're always invited to take the content and material from the appropriate cycle and be flexible or adapt it to the level of the older student. Planning actual learning activities is personal to each teacher. Once you've identified the elements you wish to teach, you can then try to find existing material. Our community has some interesting activities. Our BV, Outils de vos CP, has some links to interesting websites as well. And we have also included a planning tool that you can use to create your own activity. Here are a few basic things that you want to keep in mind when teaching, and these should also appear in your plan. You also want to be thinking about the broad areas of learning, the cross-curricular competencies, which of the ESL competencies that you are targeting, what strategies, language repertoire, and processes are being taught, practiced, or reviewed. Remember to plan for differentiation and flexibility in your groups. The teaching basic steps are activating prior knowledge, presenting the situation to students, clearly stating the purpose and instructions, modeling the task explicitly and checking understanding, monitor the task and provide feedback, and wrap up, ensuring that the students have achieved the learning that was planned. Earlier in this presentation, I mentioned the Universal Design for Learning, and in February, the MEQ offered a training on the importance of differentiated instruction. These two concepts are somewhat similar. The main objective of this approach is to ensure that teachers adjust teaching to the diverse abilities, needs, and interests of students of different ages, backgrounds, aptitudes, and skills, thus enabling them to make optimal progress in developing the competencies targeted in the program. The tools that were presented by the MEQ are available on our BV under the Ressources tab, Ressources de vos CP. Once you have watched this video, make sure to go back to Les outils de vos CP. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you have any additional questions or comments, please don't hesitate to let me know.